What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you listening in and taking some time out of your day to listen to our podcast. While I've got you here, if you are able to, please like, share, and subscribe. Do all the clicky things on the podcast, on the YouTube channel, and share it around. And make sure you are subscribed so that you are aware of when a new episode drops. So with these episodes, I will publish them first, and there may be a day or two delay before I actually put a post up on social media or whatever the case might be, and kind of notify everybody, just because at the moment it is just me that does all the editing, which is why when I do the podcast, I pretty much just go from start to finish talking about the topic or whatever topic I've got on my mind for the week, something that's come up or something that I've been talking to people about that I think it might be good just to go on a little bit of a riff about. And today when I'm recording this podcast, so today is November 30th, if you're listening to this in the future. So it's November 30th, 2021. And it marks 1 year since I got my purple belt in Jiu Jitsu. So 30th of November 2020, I got my purple belt in Jiu Jitsu. And coincidentally, on this same day, and wasn't planned, it just happened to be the way it worked out, but I also got my blue belt on this day 4 years ago. And then I also happened to get my first stripe on my white belt this same day 5 years ago. So those of you that do jiu-jitsu or know of jiu-jitsu that listen to the podcast know that it takes a long time to progress through the belts. It's not like some other martial arts that I've done in my time where you can progress through the ranks relatively quickly. It takes time. Like the average time that it takes somebody to go from starting to black belt is around about 10 years. So it's a long process, and it's a long road, and it's a hard road. When you first start, you're constantly getting beaten down, beaten up, choked out, tapped out. It's a very humbling experience when you first start doing this sport. And it is a sport. It's also a lifestyle. It's also a martial art. Like, it falls under a lot of different categories, a lot of different umbrellas. And it was something that I had always wanted to kind of do and try my hand at. I did a lot of martial arts when I was a kid, and before undertaking jiu-jitsu, I kind of dedicated myself to playing American football. So it wasn't until I retired from that I bounced around, did CrossFit for a little bit as a sport, did Olympic weightlifting as a sport. But while I was doing those, I kind of missed the physicality that you get with playing a contact sport. And I managed to find jiu-jitsu school where the timetable aligned, where I was able to get to a couple of classes a week. And I started. And when I first started, I had a idea that what I needed to do was this was a long-term thing, right? Like, I knew it wasn't going to be something that you just walk into and you master straight away. And the more I did it, the more I had an understanding of that, like a longer term understanding of, holy fuck, this is going to be something that if I want to get anywhere that resembles good, I've got to dedicate to doing this for a very, very long period of time. And I think that the further you get into it, the more you actually understand how much of a long game this is. And it probably wasn't until 18 months, 2 years ago that I kind of flicked the switch from short-term mindset. And even when I say short-term mindset, it's not as short as a lot of people that I talk to. Like, I'm not talking 6 weeks, 12 weeks. Like, I'm talking like a couple of years. I kind of switched my mindset from, okay, this is something that, like, I'm worried about what's happening in the here and now, and I'm worrying about the immediate future, to, all right, like, this has to become part of my lifestyle. And this is something that I want to be able to continue to do for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Like, right now, I'm 38. Like, this is something I want to do into my 40s, into my 50s. Obviously, I'd love if my kids were able to do it with me. That would be pretty cool. But who knows? Like, they're not Soph's at an age where she could start. Ollie's not at an age where he could start. Soph's got her own things going on. She loves doing gymnastics and stuff like that. While I'm pretty adamant on them both doing some form of martial arts, I I also understand that what this journey is like. And the fact is, especially as kids, like they have to be able to enjoy it. So I don't want to have to force them to do it. It is obviously something I will encourage them to do, but I want to be able to, I want them to make sure that they enjoy it, because if you enjoy the process, you are more likely to get more out of it and stick to it for a longer period of time. Anyway, it wasn't until that I realized that I want to, firstly, getting into my 40s, I obviously have to understand, like, this is physical training, so it has a toll on your body. So I have to make sure that I'm able to recover from what I'm doing. So I switched a lot of what I did from my training in the gym, making sure that I was doing things that were going to complement my jiu-jitsu. I reduced my volume of jiu-jitsu because going like 5-6 times a week was pretty hectic on my body, especially when I have a physical job. Like when I'm doing a lot of coaching hours, I have to make sure that I'm actually able to demonstrate movements. It was full on. If I had found it in my 20s, it's probably something I could have committed to doing, 10 hours a week. But right now it wasn't that. And especially with understanding the way recovery works and knowing if I'm going to push really hard in the short term, that may shorten the lifetime of me being able to do this. And looking at the long term and looking at that long game and wanting to be able to do this for a 10, 15, 20-year period, I decided that, all right, I'm going to do 3 classes a week. And then the stuff that I am going to do is going to be about making sure I'm moving better, addressing movement deficiencies, addressing injuries, and that is going to complement my jiu-jitsu. And all of a sudden I switched into this long-term mindset and I started to enjoy the process a lot more. And chop wood, carry water, we kind of spoke about that on one of the previous podcasts, but that long-term, looking at things from a long-term and that long-term game is sometimes a very hard thing to do. And especially from a father's perspective, I can tell you now, one of the things that I have struggled with is looking at things in different aspects of my life on a longer scale. Now, don't get me wrong. It is very, very important to have short-term goals and have short-term things that you are working towards. But it really wasn't until I looked at jiu-jitsu and used that as a metaphor for life that I really understood what long-term actually means. Because with what we do with the gym, with the Unstoppable Dad Project, I obviously talk to a lot of people who are looking for a short-term fix for a long-term problem, whether it be trying to reclaim their health and athleticism, or it be just starting something when they've never done anything in the past. Like, people come into a lot of this stuff expecting problems to be fixed in 6 weeks, 12 weeks, even 6 months or 12 months. But when you have that understanding, if we talk about physical activity and training, that I'm going to commit to doing this, not just for the next 6 weeks or 12 weeks, but for the next 6 years, 12 years. This is something that I want to implement in a sustainable way so that I can be more physically capable into my later years, and that so I can draw some enjoyment from it. Then all of a sudden, short-term results start to matter less, because it is about the long term and it's about that bigger picture. And I have struggled with that a lot in my life, especially when it comes to kids, because you want to enjoy the moment that you have with the kids right there. So when they have a tantrum, or they're cracking it, or, maybe they don't want to do something in the moment, and they grow up so fast. So sometimes it's hard to kind of look down the track, but understanding that sometimes, like, that particular moment and that particular interaction, while it can matter, there is a bigger picture at play, which is about making sure we're equipping them over the longer period of time. And yes, time is fleeting and it goes through really quick. It goes past really quickly. But when it comes to looking at ourselves, looking at our training, looking at what we're trying to get out of life in general, there's a saying that I've heard said a lot over the years, and it is, people can severely overestimate what they can do in the short term, but severely overestimate what they do in the short term, but they can severely underestimate what they can do in the long term. And I have to say that jiu-jitsu's gave me a really good perspective on that, and a perspective on the long game, and filtering back and forth from those short-term goals back to understanding that over a long period of time, what I need to focus on is, number one, I need to focus on consistent action and making sure that like I'm doing the daily, weekly things day in, day out to make sure that I'm able to show back up the next week and I'm able to get a little bit of progress. It's also given me an appreciation that like things don't happen overnight. And it's that accumulative effect over a long period of time that really, really adds up. And you can look at where you are now and you can focus on how far away from something you are. And if you start taking some little action, showing up to training 3 times a week, having fun with it, that's a big one. Like I enjoy jiu-jitsu as much as I get beat up a lot, you know, and I still feel like after 5 years, I am just scratching the surface. Like I'm only just getting started. I think the more you win it, it's like the spectrum of learning, right? And there's 4 stages of learning, and some of you might understand this, but there's basically, and I'll tell you right now, I will more than likely butcher this, but there's that unconscious incompetence, which is the first stage of learning where you don't know what you don't know. And then there's the conscious incompetence where you know what you don't know, like you start to progress things forward and you start to understand there's a bigger picture to this, and you can kind of identify certain things that you don't know. And then you start to progress through, and the end goal with anything that you do is to try and get yourself to a point where, so the next stage is conscious competence, where you are competent in what you're doing, but you're having to think about the way you do it. And you're having to think about every little step along the way. And then the final stage of learning is that unconscious competence, where basically things are reactive. So it's like when we learn to drive, right? Like the amount of times that there's been a few times, which this is a really scary thought, but I'm sure some of where you drive home and it's almost like you're on autopilot, right? Like you almost don't remember the drive home. Like you've been driving that much that you just go through the motions essentially. Like that's unconscious competence. Like you're alert, but you're not, you're kind of on autopilot as you do it. And understanding that like for everything we do and everything we start, there needs to be a period where you just need to show up and do the work, because you're going to suck at it when you first start. And jiu-jitsu really highlighted that for me when I first started. And then eventually you start moving through those stages for different things. And it's the same with physical training. Parenting's a little bit different because as the kids grow, like it feels like you go all the way back to the start of that learning process as they move into a different phase of their life. Which I actually think is a pretty cool thing because I enjoy watching them develop, and then it gives me more of an understanding of myself. But this is also too, having that appreciation of the long game for me when it comes to like parenting my kids as they evolve, like understanding that, you know, I'm maybe going to suck as a dad today. I'm maybe going to suck as a parent. But I can get back and I can try and do my best and do it tomorrow, because as long as my kids know that I love them, you know, we can get back to it tomorrow, and we can keep going. And that's the thing. That's playing the long game. That's trying to work through things and keep moving forward and just doing those consistent actions day in, day out to move the needle forward and hopefully better yourself. Because by just focusing on taking those consistent actions instead of focusing on how far away from a particular result you can be, and you do that over a 1 year, 2 year, 4 year, 6 year, 5 year period. And then you look back on where you started 5 years after you've started, and you've taken that consistent action every day, every week for 5 years. It's unrecognizable, the position that you'll be in. And I think by focusing on short term and not playing the long game, even though we might have short-term goals, we can complicate the action that we need to take. And that can cause a bit of paralysis by analysis. It's something that I know full well with a lot of aspects of my life. I've been caught out over the years. I've been, I think that I've got to take this massive action to get these short-term results. And you do. In order to get good short-term results, you've got to take massive action. But if you just focus on, taking some daily actions or some weekly actions, doing something you enjoy, and there's other things in your life you're going to have to do things you don't enjoy. I get that and I appreciate that. But if we just relate it back to training, then finding something you enjoy doing, showing up 3 times a week, and not overthinking it, not overcomplicating it, and understanding that, hey, I'm doing this for a 5, 10, 15-year period, can sometimes take the pressure off. Can sometimes take the pressure off you, can sometimes take the pressure off your interactions with other people. And in doing that, you can grow to enjoy the process and grow to enjoy what you are doing with yourself and appreciating the journey, rather than agonizing over how far away from an end result you might be. So just a bit of reflection on, I guess, what jiu-jitsu's taught me about playing the long game. Understanding that if you're in it for a good while, which as dads, as parents, we're in it for life, right? Like, even though they grow up so quickly, time's fleeting and all those other cliches, we are in it for life. And sometimes we can get wrapped up in the here and now, which can cause us to lose our cool, cause us to be anxious about things, cause us to potentially be depressed about things. And, knowing that it's never too late to make a change and take some consistent action, because the difference in where you are now to where you can be in 5 years' time, just from taking small, consistent actions, is absolutely phenomenal, and it'll be night and day. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're guilty of, like I have been, in really heavily focusing on short-term results rather than playing the long game with a lot of stuff. But hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you got a bit of an insight into, what I've got out of the last 5 years of training. Hopefully you can, if you're not doing something, you can find something you enjoy doing, and you can kind of start moving that needle forward for yourself. So thank you. If you need anything, as always, please reach out. We have our Facebook page, The Unstoppable Dad, and our Instagram at The Unstoppable Dad. We have a Facebook group on the Facebook page, The Unstoppable Dad Project. So you can jump in, you can add yourself in there, join the discussion, and have a great week. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.